Hi everyone, welcome back. Well, we're back down at Whiteman Park working on the Whiteman Collections International Titan D tractor. We've still got the chassis sitting here, we're just waiting for the sandblasters to have time to for me to take this in and sandblast this for us. The next job is to try and get this wheel off the axle here. So this wheel is fixed to the axle and turns with it. There's a keyway in here that we've taken out. Now that that is out, this wheel should turn freely on that axle and should just slide off. However, the bearings on this side had an open grease cup hole in the top that was funneling water into the bearings. And then it ran down here into this gap here and has rusted the axle onto the wheel. And I suspect this is going to be quite difficult to get off simply because of how long the shaft is running through that hub. So that's going to take quite a lot of pressure to get it off. I have tried heating up the hub already, but with one oxy torch I just can't get enough heat into a casting that size, even when I pack rags and stuff around it to try and keep the heat in. So today we're going to build a puller to try and pull it off. One of the things is we want to be able to press on our puller as close into the axle as we can, rather than out here on this ridge. So I've got a couple of short lengths of pipe. We're going to split this in half and so that we can fit it around the axle. And I've cut two pieces of it. We're going to put one inside the other to give us a little bit more strength. And then we're going to make up a frame out of this heavy wall tube here. And we've got a couple of big long bolts to go through it. And we'll put a plate on the other side that we can press on the axle with. I'm not sure that this is going to be enough to get it off. I need to try and get a porta power, which is basically a hydraulic jack that I can put in here to use to give me a bit more pressure on that. And I suspect that this bar is not going to be strong enough for what we're trying to do here. But we'll give it a go and see what we can come up with. The first thing we're going to do is start by splitting these two and making up that collar. And I'll chuck this on the power hacksaw and cut it in half. There is just enough there for the two pieces I need to clamp together on this side. Today we're using a plasma cutter for cutting a lot of the pieces of metal. These cut a little bit like an oxy. They use a jet of air with an electric arc, plasma arc, to cut the steel. And they're great fun and they work so well. They will not cut through steel as thick as an oxy torch will, but for lighter gauge steel, these are just brilliant tools. If you ever get a chance to have a go with one, make sure you give it a go. Now, I'm not a particularly steady hand at cutting with these, but because they don't put out much heat, you can actually mark them with a felt-tipped pen and it won't burn your pen marks off, unlike with an oxy, you've burnt it off long before you get there. Okay, well, we've got our pieces of pipe welded in. The next thing we need to do is drill some holes in here to be able to bolt these two pieces together. I'm not sure if these bolts are really quite big enough, but we'll probably put three on each side in just to hold it together once we've got it around the axle. Okay, so we've got a couple of bolts in to hold everything together. Next we need to cut some holes in on either side for our threaded rod to go through. And we're going to cut some holes. This is 10 by 50 plate. We're going to cut some holes in this just to act as a big washer under our threaded rod. And then this side is pretty close to done and ready to put on the axle and start pulling on. So I'm going to cut these holes next. I'm just going to use the plasma cutter to cut all of these bits out, and we'll come back to it and put it on the axle. Okay, we've got the two halves of our puller finished. Now we can bolt it up to our axle and see where the two rods end up coming through the spokes, and then we can work out what we put on this end to jack against. Okay, we've got our puller bolted up on here. There's still a little bit of space in here, so we know we're pushing on the centre of the hub. I'm feeling that we may still need to put some bracing on the back here, because I think we might end up bending these two. But I don't think they're going to be strong enough. But we'll get to that a little bit later on. Next, we need to find a big heavy piece to go in between here. Then we can put our hydraulic jack on the centre of the axle there, with the base down this end, and give it a little bit of a nudge and see what's going to happen. Because we have got such a large surface area of rust in there, I'm feeling like this is almost a foot across, so 300 millimetres, and the axle's just a fraction over 4 inches in diameter. That is a lot of surface area in there that has rusted up. So we'll finish building this and see what happens. Okay, so we've got the back half of our puller bolted up around our axles here, around our axle here. We come round this side. I found another heavy walled piece of RHS, and I've got a couple of big washers on the outside here, a couple of bits of pipe in here to try and spread the load out. We've got a 20-ton hydraulic jack in here. Now at the moment that's got just enough pressure on it to keep it in place. So let's jack it up a bit and see what happens. These jacks don't work particularly well on their side like this, but as long as you keep the pump on the downhill side, they'll work for a bit. You may have to end up putting a bit more oil in them. Always stand well out the way when you're doing this too, because when something lets go, it often lets go in a big hurry. Well, at the moment, nothing's happening. It's got a reasonable force on it there. Have a look around this side. Looks like it's all holding together the way it should. Nothing's particularly bending. I do see that we've pushed our pipe through a bit and we're now sitting on the outside here. That won't matter too much. I just wanted to keep at least some of the pressure right in next to the axle. Well, we might just walk away from this for a bit and just let it sit with that pressure on it. And sometimes over a little bit of time, they just pop off. Especially if you leave them overnight with the pressure on, with the change in temperature as it cools down at night. and then warms up again the next day, sometimes that can be enough to do it. So we're just going to walk away from this and leave it for the moment, and we'll come back to it a little bit later on. Alright, well, we left it sitting overnight and nothing happened. We put a bit more pressure on it and we started bending some things. So we've made up some channel to go under the bolts here, and that's nice and strong and doesn't seem to be bending anymore. It was starting to pull the bolts down in between. Well, on one side it was pulling the bolts down in between. On this side we started bending this, so we put bigger washers and stuff up here. We've put a flat plate under the jack. We've put some 10 by 50 flat bar on the side. We've heated it up again, and we had pretty close to 20 tonnes on this at one point, but it's put a nice curve in here now. So yeah, we're bending all of this stuff, so we're going to have to find something a bit stronger to go on here to keep the pressure on. We'll leave it at that for this week. Unfortunately, we didn't get quite as far as we'd hoped to and actually managed to get the wheel off. It hasn't even budged on there. So we're going to go and have another think about it and see if we can come up with another plan. Anyway, even though we didn't get very far, I hope you've enjoyed this little video. These are what happens when you're doing restorations. Sometimes the first thing you try doesn't work. Sometimes even the 10th or 15th thing you try doesn't work. And you've just got to walk away for a little while and then come back to it. So we'll make up another plan and we'll get back to it next week. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye.